In a quiet Texas town, when an officer stopped by his regular gas station, he was greeted by the familiar faces of the father and daughter who had run the place for years. However, today, something felt terribly off. It wasn't just the surprise of seeing the young worker pregnant, but also an unspoken tension in the air that he couldn't quite place. Later, when he glanced at his receipt from the visit, his blood ran cold. He knew something was terribly wrong, and he had to act fast. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape of Terlingua, Texas. Officer Luke Carter guided his patrol car along the familiar winding road, the monotonous hum of the engine his only companion in the early morning silence. He'd been driving for hours, the vast expanse of the Chihuahuan Desert stretching out endlessly before him. As he rounded a bend, Luke noticed the fuel gauge hovering dangerously close to empty. He let out a small sigh of relief, knowing that the Lone Star gas station was just a few miles ahead. It was a place he knew well, having stopped there countless times over the past 5 years during his patrols of this remote area near Big Bend National Park. The last 8 months had been a whirlwind for Luke. Changes in the police force had pulled him away from his usual route, sending him to training camps and unfamiliar assignments. But now, finally, he was back where he felt he belonged. The familiar terrain and the promise of friendly faces at the gas station filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't realized he'd been missing. As the weathered sign for Lone Star Gas came into view, Luke felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The station looked much the same as it always had, a small, weather-beaten building that had stood strong against decades of harsh desert conditions. The faded paint and slightly crooked sign only added to its charm, in Luke's opinion. The small, family-run business had become something of a sanctuary for him over the years. It wasn't just a place to fill up his tank and grab a quick bite. It was a slice of normalcy in the vast, unpredictable wilderness of West Texas. Luke pulled up to the pump, the gravel crunching beneath his tires. As he stepped out of the car, the scorching Texas heat hit him like a wall. Even at this early hour, the temperature was already climbing rapidly. The promise of a cold drink and air conditioning inside the station was almost too tempting to resist. Luke's stomach growled in response, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since the previous evening. With the tank full, Luke replaced the nozzle and screwed the gas cap back into place. He approached the entrance of the store, and Luke found himself looking forward to seeing Frank and his daughter, Olin. They were good people, hard-working and kind, always ready with a smile and a bit of friendly conversation. He wondered how they'd been doing in his 8 months' absence, hoping that business had been good, despite the remote location. The bell above the door chimed as Luke stepped inside, the blast of cool air a welcome relief from the oppressive heat outside. He blinked, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dimmer interior. The familiar scent of coffee and baked goods enveloped him, and for a moment it felt as though he'd never been away. "Good morning," Luke called out cheerfully, making his way to the counter. He spotted Frank first, the older man's weathered face breaking into a smile of recognition. "Well, I'll be," Frank said, wiping his hands on his apron, "if it isn't Officer Carter. Been a while since we've seen you round these parts." Luke nodded, grinning. "Too long, Frank. How have you been?" Before Frank could answer, movement behind the counter caught Luke's eye. Olin emerged from the back room, and Luke felt his jaw drop slightly in surprise. The young woman he remembered was now very visibly pregnant, her belly swollen beneath her t-shirt. "Olin!" Luke said, unable to keep the shock from his voice. Wow! Congratulations!" Olin offered a small smile, though Luke couldn't help but notice it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks, Officer Carter," she said softly. Luke's mind raced, trying to reconcile the image before him with his memories of the girl he'd known. He'd watched Olin grow up over the years, from a shy pre-teen helping out in the store to a confident young woman, but this was unexpected. "How far along are you?" Luke asked, trying to keep his tone casual. 8 months, Olin replied, her hand resting on her belly. "Going on 9. Luke nodded, still processing the information. He knew Olin was young, but he couldn't quite remember her exact age. Curiosity got the better of him. "And if you don't mind me asking, how old are you now, Olin?" 18, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. The atmosphere in the store seemed to shift, a tension settling over them that hadn't been there before. Luke glanced at Frank, noticing the tightness around the older man's eyes. "Yeah, it wasn't really what I wanted," Frank muttered, shaking his head. "But, well, never mind." Eager to change the subject, Luke explained his long absence, detailing the training camps and departmental changes that had kept him away. Frank listened politely, but the usual warmth in his demeanor seemed diminished. Olin, for her part, remained uncharacteristically quiet, focusing on preparing Luke's usual order, an iced coffee and a breakfast sandwich. As Luke paid for his purchases, he couldn't shake the sense that the family had been through a tough time. The once warm and chatty family he'd known for years now seemed distant and guarded. He figured it was probably due to the unexpected pregnancy and the strain it must be putting on them, especially with Olin being so young. Gathering his food and drink, Luke offered a final smile to Frank and Olin. "It's good to see you both," he said sincerely. "I'm glad to be back on this route. Take care and congratulations again, Olin." As he stepped back out into the blistering heat, Luke couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. He hoped that, despite the challenging circumstances, the kind family he'd come to care for would be all right. Luke slid into his patrol car, savoring the blast of cool air from the vents. He took a long sip of his iced coffee, the chilled drink offering instant relief from the sweltering heat, then bit into the sandwich he'd just bought. As he sat there in his car at the gas station parking lot enjoying his breakfast, he reached for his wallet to tuck away his employer's gas card. It was then that he noticed Olin approaching his vehicle, a receipt in her hand. She tapped on the window, and Luke rolled it down, curiosity piqued. "I'm sorry, Officer Luke, but you forgot your receipt. I saw you were still here, so I—" Olin said, her breath ragged as she held the lower part of her stomach, supporting her pregnant belly. "Oh, actually, I don't need the receipt, Olin. That's really kind of you to bring it all the way over. You're pregnant. You shouldn't have to go out of your way like that." "But are you sure you don't want the receipt?" Olin asked, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that caught him off guard. Luke smiled, a bit confused by her insistence. "No, thank you," he replied. "I don't need it since I used the department's gas card." Olin hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped back. "All right, if you're sure," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the car's engine. Luke watched as she folded the receipt into her palm and began to walk back toward the store, her steps slow and careful. As Luke pulled out of the parking lot, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Olin's behavior had been odd, to say the least. He'd known her for years, watched her grow from a shy pre-teen into a young woman, and he'd never seen her act so anxious. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. The red dirt road stretched out before him, the landscape a patchwork of scrub brush and rocky outcroppings. Luke's mind wandered as he drove, replaying the strange interaction at the gas station. He'd always prided himself on his instincts, honed by years on the force, and right now, those instincts were telling him that something wasn't right. Perhaps Olin was just dealing with the late phase of the pregnancy or some family issue, he thought. He was about to radio in to check if there had been any reports of suspicious activity in the area when a blinking light on his dashboard caught his attention. The oil level warning was flashing insistently, a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of West Texas, the mundane realities of vehicle maintenance couldn't be ignored. Luke let out a frustrated sigh. He'd just left the gas station, and now he'd have to turn back. It wasn't a major inconvenience. He was still close enough that it wouldn't take long to return, but it felt like an omen of sorts, as if the universe was conspiring to keep him near the Lone Star gas station. As he made a U-turn, kicking up a cloud of dust in his wake, Luke couldn't help but wonder if this unexpected return might shed some light on the odd behavior he'd witnessed. He chided himself for being paranoid, reminding himself for 100th time that Olin's pregnancy and young age were likely explanation enough for any strange behavior. The gas station came back into view. Luke pulled up to the storefront, noticing that Frank's old minivan was the only other vehicle in the lot. The quietness of the place struck him anew. In the bustling cities where he'd spent the last 8 months, he'd almost forgotten how oppressively silent the desert could be. As Luke stepped out of his car, the bell above the door chimed, and Frank emerged from the store. The older man's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Officer Carter," Frank called out, his voice tinged with what sounded like worry. "Is something wrong? Did you forget something?" Luke raised a hand in greeting, trying to project an air of casualness he didn't quite feel. "Nothing wrong," he assured Frank. "Just realized I need to top up my oil. Thought I'd grab a bottle while I was still close by." Frank's shoulders seemed to relax slightly, but there was still a tension in his stance that Luke couldn't quite understand. "Oh, of course," Frank said, nodding. "Olin can help you with that. I need to make a phone call." Before Luke could respond, Frank had ducked back inside the store. Through the window, Luke could see him speaking urgently to Olin, who nodded and made her way to the counter. Luke entered the store, the cool air a stark contrast to the baking heat outside. Olin looked up as he approached, her face a mask of forced neutrality. "What kind of oil do you need, Officer Luke?" she asked, her voice steady but lacking its usual warmth. "The synthetic, please," Luke replied, his eyes following her movements as she reached behind the counter for a bottle. "Oh, and this time I'll need the receipt for reimbursement." "Sure, officer," she said. As Olin rang up the purchase, Luke noticed that she seemed to be taking an unusually long time with the transaction. Her fingers moved slowly over the keys of the old cash register, her eyes darting between the machine and Luke's face. Not wanting to make her uncomfortable, Luke let his gaze wander around the store. He noticed details he'd overlooked earlier, the black mold creeping along the edges of the ceiling, the yellowing stains and cracks spider-webbing across the walls. It was a stark reminder of the harsh conditions the building faced daily, baking in the relentless Texas sun and freezing in the desert nights. Luke's heart went out to the family. He knew their business relied heavily on tourists visiting Big Bend National Park, and maintaining the building in such a remote location must be a constant struggle. The signs of wear and tear were more pronounced than he remembered, making him wonder if the last 8 months had been particularly tough for them. A soft cough from Olin brought Luke's attention back to the counter. She was holding out a receipt and the bottle of oil, her expression unreadable. "Here you go," she said softly. Luke took the items, offering a smile that wasn't returned. "Thank you, Olin. Take care of yourself, all right?" Olin nodded silently, her eyes following him as he made his way to the exit. Luke raised a hand in farewell to Frank, who was still engrossed in his phone call, before stepping back out into the sweltering heat. He walked to his car, receipt and oil bottle in hand. There had been an unspoken tension in the store, a heaviness he couldn't quite put his finger on. The usual warmth was missing, and even the typically friendly family had seemed almost eager for him to leave. He shook the thoughts away, chalking it up to the hot weather playing tricks on his mind. Luke popped the hood of his patrol car, focusing on the task of adding oil into the port with the help of them dipstick. He tried to push away the nagging doubts in his mind. But as he closed the hood and slid back into the driver's seat, he found himself glancing back at the store one last time. No matter what was going on between Frank and Olin, he just hoped they were doing all right. His 8-month absence had somehow chipped away at the familiarity they once shared. He wondered how things had changed so much in such a short time. The patrol car's engine rumbled to life as Luke turned the key, its familiar vibrations humming through the seat. He slipped his wallet, phone, and the newly acquired receipt into the center console, his movements automatic while his mind replayed the strange interactions he'd just experienced. Luke's eyes flicked to the dashboard, relief washing over him as he confirmed that the oil warning light was no longer blinking. At least one problem had been solved, even if a dozen new questions had taken its place. He shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the gas station, the building growing smaller in his rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely around a bend in the road. The vast empty landscape of Terlingua stretched out before him, the road cutting a lonely path through the sun-baked earth. In the harsh light of day, the desert seemed to shimmer and dance, mirages forming and dissipating in the distance. It was a view Luke had seen countless times before. As he drove, Luke's mind wandered back to Olin and Frank. The young woman's pregnancy had come as a shock, but it was more than that. There had been fear in Olin's eyes, a desperation that seemed at odds with the joyful anticipation one might expect from an expectant mother. And Frank, the man Luke had known for years as a kind, jovial presence, had seemed agitated, almost hostile. Luke was so lost in thought that he almost missed the crackle of his radio. He quickly turned down the car's air conditioning, straining to hear the voice coming through the static. "Unit 14, this is dispatch. Do you copy?" Luke reached for the radio, pressing the talk button. "This is Unit 14, I copy. Go ahead, dispatch." "We've got a situation at the Rusty Nail Pub, about 15 miles east of your current position. Reports of a disturbance. Can you respond?" Luke hesitated for a moment. The pub was in the opposite direction from where he'd been heading, and something in his gut was telling him to stay close to the gas station. But duty called, and he couldn't ignore a direct request from dispatch based on nothing more than a hunch. 10-4 dispatch, I'm en route to the Rusty Nail Pub, ETA approximately 20 minutes. Luke made a U-turn, kicking up a cloud of dust in his wake. The miles ticked by as Luke sped towards the pub, the monotony of the desert landscape, broken only by the occasional cactus or weathered road sign. He was nearing his destination when he felt a sudden urge for a sip of his iced coffee, the last remnants of his earlier stop at the gas station. At a red light, one of the few in this sparsely populated area, Luke reached for the cup in the holder near the center console. As he lifted it, he noticed with dismay that condensation had formed on the outside of the cup, creating a small puddle in the compartment. Muttering under his breath, Luke set the cup back down and reached for his wallet and phone, intent on moving them before they got wet. As he picked up his wallet, the receipt from the gas station fluttered out, landing face up on the console. Luke was about to stuff it back into his wallet when something caught his eye. There, printed in stark black letters on the white paper, was a single word that made his blood run cold. Help. For a moment, Luke sat frozen, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. It had to be a mistake, a printing error, or maybe his eyes were playing tricks on him in the harsh desert light. But as he picked up the receipt with trembling fingers, there was no denying the truth of what was before him. The radio crackled to life again, jolting Luke from his daze. "Unit 14, what's your status?" "How far are you from the Rusty Nail Pub?" Luke stared at the radio, then back at the receipt in his hand. In that moment he knew he had a choice to make, one that could have far-reaching consequences. Taking a deep breath, Luke pressed the talk button on his radio. "Negative dispatch, I'm unable to respond to the Rusty Nail Pub at this time. I need to investigate a suspicious situation at a gas station on my previous route. Please send another unit to the pub." There was a pause before the dispatcher responded, confusion evident in their voice. "Copy that, Unit 14. Can you provide more details on the situation at the gas station?" Luke hesitated, aware that what he was about to say would sound far-fetched without the context of his earlier interactions. "Not at this time, dispatch. I need to verify some information first. I'll report back as soon as I have more details." "Understood, Unit 14. Proceed with caution and keep us updated." As Luke ended the transmission, he was already turning his car around, heading back towards the Lone Star gas station, with a sense of urgency he hadn't felt in years. The receipt with its plea for help lay on the passenger seat, a silent testament to the fact that sometimes the most important messages come in the most unexpected ways. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as Luke pushed his patrol car to its limits, racing back towards a place he'd left less than an hour ago. He knew he might be overreacting, that there could be a perfectly innocent explanation for the message on the receipt. But the memory of Olin's fearful eyes and Frank's agitated behavior told him otherwise. The familiar silhouette of the Lone Star gas station emerged on the horizon, shimmering in the heat haze like a mirage. Luke's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he approached, his mind racing through possible scenarios, each more alarming than the last. The 15-minute drive back had felt like an eternity, every second stretching out as his imagination conjured up increasingly dire situations. As he pulled into the dusty parking lot, the first thing Luke noticed was the closed sign hanging crookedly in the window. His heart sank. In all the years he'd been patrolling this route, he'd never seen the station closed at this hour. It was barely past noon, and on a normal day, Frank and Olin would be serving for customers passing through. Luke parked his patrol car and stepped out, the heat hitting him like a physical force. He approached the gas pumps, noting that they were all switched off. The silence was eerie, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Despite the closed sign, Luke decided to try the door. To his surprise, it wasn't locked. He pushed it open, the familiar bell chiming overhead, the sound jarringly cheerful in the tense atmosphere. "Hello?" Luke called out, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his holstered weapon. "Frank?" "Olin, it's Officer Carter. Is everything all right?" No response came. The store was dim, lit only by what sunlight managed to filter through the dusty windows. The air conditioning was off and the interior was stifling. Luke's first thought was of Olin, heavily pregnant and in this heat. His concern deepened. He moved further into the store, his police training kicking in as he scanned for any signs of disturbance. Nothing seemed out of place, but the stillness felt wrong, oppressive. Luke made his way behind the counter, his eyes drawn to the door leading to the back storage room. It was closed, and when he tried the handle, he found it locked. He knocked firmly. "Frank?" "Olin, are you back there? It's Luke. If you can hear me, please open up." Again, silence was his only answer. Luke's unease was rapidly turning to alarm. He considered radioing for backup, but hesitated. What exactly would he say? That he'd returned to a closed gas station because of a message on a receipt. He needed more to go on. As he turned away from the locked door, something caught his eye. Beneath the counter sat a small trash bin, the office kind without a lid, and inside were several crumpled pieces of paper, receipts. Luke crouched down, eyeing the bin as his mind fixated on the printed message from his receipt. He wondered if the other receipts carried the same mark. His thoughts flashed back to that morning when Olin had tried to hand him the receipt for his gas purchase. He'd declined, thinking nothing of it at the time, but she'd been unusually insistent. Now a cold realization crept over him. What if that receipt, the one he'd refused, had held the same desperate plea for help as the oil receipt sitting in his car? He began to sift through the discarded receipts, carefully uncrumpling each one. Most were just standard transaction records, lacking any trace of the help mark. But he was searching for something specific, a receipt from this morning's transactions. With each crumpled paper he unfolded, his concern grew. The one he was looking for wasn't there. As he searched, scenarios began to play out in his mind. What if Frank had discovered Olin's attempts to reach out for help? What if he had disposed of the evidence? But why? What could have changed? Standing up, Luke's mind raced through possibilities. He'd always known Frank to be a kind and caring father. The idea that he might be involved in something nefarious seemed impossible. But then again, Luke reminded himself, sometimes the people you think you know can surprise you in the worst ways. Luke scanned the store once more, but finding nothing out of place, he made his exit. The harsh sunlight hit him as soon as he stepped out of the dim interior, momentarily blinding him. Blinking to clear his vision, he circled around to the back of the building, hoping to uncover some clue about where Frank and Olin might have gone. But the area behind the store was as empty and silent as the inside had been. The white van was missing, and there was no signs of life, just the endless expanse of the Texas desert stretching out before him. Luke returned to his patrol car, his mind whirling with possibilities. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was unusual and off, but he had no concrete evidence of any crime. For all he knew, Frank and Olin could have left for a medical appointment related to her pregnancy. But why close the store so abruptly? And why the hidden plea for help? As he sat in his car, debating his next move, a glint of something on the road caught Luke's eye. Leaning forward, he squinted against the sun's glare. There, leading away from the gas station, was a set of tire tracks darker and fresher than the others on the dusty road. Someone had left in a hurry and recently. Without hesitation, Luke started his engine. He had no idea where these tracks might lead, but it was the only lead he had. As he pulled out of the parking lot, following the trail into the desert, Luke keyed his radio. He needed to let dispatch know what was happening, just in case. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I'm following a suspicious vehicle trail leading away from the Lone Star gas station. Possible missing persons situation. I'll keep you updated on my location." "Copy that, Unit 14. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Proceed with caution. Do you need backup?" Luke hesitated for a moment before responding. "Negative on backup for now. I'll call it in if needed." As he drove deeper into the desert, following the winding trail left by the unknown vehicle, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that he was driving into something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Whatever was going on with Frank and Olin, he was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter where this dusty road might lead him. The relentless Texas sun beat down on Luke's patrol car as he followed the dark tire tracks deeper into the desert. The familiar landscape of Terlingua gave way to increasingly rugged terrain, the road narrowing and becoming more treacherous with each passing mile. Luke's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. As he navigated a particularly sharp bend, a flash of white in the distance caught his attention. Luke slowed the car, squinting against the sun's glare. There, shimmering in the heat haze, was a white van parked haphazardly at the side of the road near Terlingua Ghost Town entrance pole. Luke's heart rate quickened. He eased off the accelerator, allowing his patrol car to coast silently closer. As the van came into clearer view, a familiar figure emerged from behind it. Luke's breath caught in his throat. It was Frank, unmistakable in his blue and white checkered shirt and pale cowboy hat. But something was strange. Frank was carrying what looked like a long black pole. A camera tripod, Luke realized with a jolt. What on earth was Frank doing out here with camera equipment? Forcing himself to remain calm, Luke pulled his patrol car to a stop behind the van. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever might come next. As he stepped out of the car, he adopted a casual, friendly demeanor, determined not to let on about his suspicions. "Frank," Luke called out, raising a hand in greeting. "Fancy meeting you out here. Everything all right?" Frank whirled around, surprise and something that looked like fear flashing across his face before he schooled his features into a neutral expression. "Officer Carter," he said, his voice strained. "What brings you out this way?" Luke approached slowly, maintaining a non-threatening posture. "Oh, you know how it is, just patrolling the area, making sure everything's safe out here in the middle of nowhere." He gestured to the van. "Haven't seen this old girl out and about in a while, having car trouble." Frank shook his head, shifting the tripod from one hand to the other. No trouble, just taking her out for a spin. She may be old, but she's tough." Luke nodded, his eyes scanning the area. There was no sign of Olin. "Where's your daughter?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "I thought she might be with you. What with the baby coming soon and all." A flicker of something, panic, guilt, crossed Frank's face. "Oh, I dropped Olin at home. She was feeling tired. You know how it is with pregnancy. Her back was aching, so I thought it best she rest." Luke's cop instincts were screaming at him that something was very wrong, but he maintained his friendly facade. "That's thoughtful of you. And the tripod? Doing some desert photography?" Frank's grip on the tripod tightened, his knuckles turning white. "Ah, this?" "No, I'm meeting a friend. He's making a movie out here in the ghost town. Amateur thing, you know. YouTube video or something. I'm just helping with the equipment." Luke raised an eyebrow. "A movie shoot out here? You know they need permits for that kind of thing, right?" Frank nodded quickly, sweat beading on his forehead despite the shade from his hat. Of course, it's not really a movie, more of a short clip. Nothing professional." Luke hummed non-committally, his eyes scanning the horizon. There was no sign of any film crew, no other vehicles in sight. The desert stretched out empty and silent in all directions. "Well, since I'm here," Luke said, turning back to Frank, "I was hoping to catch Olin. My sister's expecting, you see, only in her second month. I wanted to ask Olin about her doctor, get some recommendations. I forgot to ask her back in the store." Before Frank could respond, his phone rang, the shrill tone cutting through the tense atmosphere. As Frank fumbled to extract the phone from his pocket, something fell to the ground. A small, crumpled piece of white paper. Luke's heart nearly stopped. He recognized it immediately. A receipt. Could that be the first receipt Olin had tried to give him earlier? Is this one also has the hidden cry for help? "Oops, sorry about that," Frank said, quickly bending down to snatch up the paper at the same time as Luke. "Didn't mean to litter, officer." As Luke's hand brushed against the crumpled receipt, he caught sight of a faint, smudged shadow on the paper. Just the first few letters, but enough to make his pulse quicken. Help. This confirmed his suspicions. It was the receipt Olin had tried to give him that morning. Luke watched as Frank gripped the receipt and swiftly shoved it into his pocket, his mind racing. Why did Frank have that receipt? Had he discovered Olin's attempt to reach out for help? And if so, what was really happening to Olin? Is she really safe at home? The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was disturbing. For every answer Luke found, more questions seemed to bloom. He knew he needed to act, but he couldn't risk tipping Frank off. Not when Olin's whereabouts and potentially her life were still in question. "Well, I should get back to my patrol," Luke said, forcing a smile. "You take care now, Frank. Give my best to Olin when you see her." Frank nodded, already turning away to answer his still ringing phone. "Will do, officer." "Drive safe." Luke walked back to his patrol car, his heart pounding. As soon as he was out of Frank's line of sight, he grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I need immediate backup at my location. Possible kidnapping situation. Suspect is Frank Dawson, owner of the Lone Star gas station. His daughter, Olin Dawson, is a pregnant mother, missing, and potentially in danger." As he waited for a response, Luke kept his eyes on Frank's van in the rearview mirror. Whatever was going on here, he was determined to get to the bottom of it. Olin's life, and the life of her unborn child, might depend on what he did next. The crackling response from dispatch confirmed that backup was on its way, but Luke knew every second counted. He couldn't risk losing sight of Frank, not when Olin's life might be in danger. With practiced ease, he maneuvered his patrol car into a hidden spot behind a large boulder, giving him a clear view of Frank's van while remaining out of sight. Through the shimmering heat waves, Luke watched as Frank ended his phone call and moved to the back of the van. The older man swung open the rear doors and rummaged inside for a moment. Though Luke couldn't see what he was after, the man's struggle was evident. When Frank finally emerged, he was carrying a black equipment box and the tripod. Luke's breath caught in his throat as he watched Frank slam the van doors shut and begin walking purposefully into the desert, the box and tripod gripped tightly in his hands. As Frank's figure grew smaller in the distance, eventually disappearing behind a rocky outcropping, Luke was faced with a difficult decision. Should he follow Frank on foot, potentially walking into an unknown and dangerous situation? Or should he wait for backup, risking losing track of Frank and any chance of finding Olin? The memory of the desperate help printed on the receipt made the decision for him. Luke couldn't wait. He radioed in his intention to follow the suspect on foot and quietly exited his vehicle. The desert heat hit him like a physical force as soon as he stepped out from the air-conditioned interior of his patrol car. Sweat immediately began to bead on his forehead as he carefully made his way towards Frank's abandoned van. He circled around and tried the front door of the van. It was locked. Luke's curiosity deepened as he thought about what might be hidden in the back. He remembered the way Frank had struggled earlier, and though he was certain the rear doors would be locked too, he tried them anyway. As his hand brushed against the back of the vehicle and he attempted to peer through the darkened window, a faint, muffled sound caught his attention. Luke froze, straining his ears. There it was again, a dull thud, as if something or someone was striking the inside of the van. His heart pounded in his chest as he pressed his ear against the hot metal, the noise growing just enough to confirm his worst fears. Someone was inside the van. "Olin," Luke called out softly, tapping on the metal. Olin, is that you? It's Officer Carter. If you can hear me, make a sound. The response was immediate. A series of frantic thumps and muffled cries. Luke's blood ran cold. Olin was alive but trapped inside the sweltering van. Luke tried the rear doors, but they were locked tight. He looked around frantically for something to break the window, knowing that every moment Olin spent in the overheated vehicle could be dangerous for her and her unborn child. Just as he was about to use his baton to smash the window, the distant sound of approaching vehicles reached his ears. Backup had arrived. Within moments, 2 more patrol cars pulled up, their sirens cutting off as they came to a stop. Officers Johnson and Rodriguez quickly approached, their hands on their holstered weapons. "What's the situation, Carter?" Johnson asked, his eyes scanning the area. "Olin Dawson is locked inside this van," Luke explained quickly. "Her father, Frank, is our suspect. He's gone off into the desert with some equipment. We need to get her out now and then go after Frank." Rodriguez nodded, already moving towards the van with a crowbar from his cruiser. "Stand back," he warned, before swinging the tool at the van's rear window. The glass shattered with a crash, and Luke immediately reached in to unlock the doors. As they swung open, the sight inside made his stomach churn. Olin lay on the floor of the van, her hands and feet bound with duct tape, a cloth gag stuffed in her mouth. Her eyes were wide with fear and relief as she saw Luke, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, Olin, you're safe now," Luke soothed as he carefully removed the gag and began working on her bonds. "We're going to get you out of here." As soon as she was free, Olin threw her arms around Luke, sobbing uncontrollably. "Thank you," she choked out between sobs. "Thank you for saving me, my life, from that monster." Luke's brow furrowed in confusion. "Monster? Olin, what do you mean? What did your father do?" Olin pulled back, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "He's not my father, he's a monster," she cried. "He's been lying to me my entire life, and now he was going to—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "What was he going to do, Olin?" Luke pressed gently, even as his mind reeled from the revelation that Frank wasn't her real father. Olin shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Something terrible, to me and the baby. Please, you have to stop him before it's too late." Luke nodded, his resolve hardening. He turned to Johnson and Rodriguez. "Officer Johnson, please stay with Olin. Call for medical assistance. Rodriguez, come with me. We're going after Frank." As Luke and Rodriguez set off into the desert, following Frank's tracks, his mind was racing. What had seemed like a simple missing persons case had turned into something far more sinister. Whatever Frank was planning to do, Luke was determined to stop him. The safety of Olin and her unborn child depended on it. With each step into the unforgiving desert landscape, Luke steeled himself for the confrontation to come. Whatever dark secrets lay hidden in the sun-baked earth of Terlingua, he was about to uncover them all. The merciless Texas sun beat down on Luke as he carefully made his way across the rugged desert terrain, following Frank's tracks. The rocky ground was treacherous, loose stones threatening to slip underfoot with each step. But Luke pressed on, driven by the urgency of the situation and the haunting fear in Olin's eyes. He kept low, using the scattered boulders and sparse vegetation for cover as he advanced. The desert stretched out before him, a vast, unforgiving expanse that seemed to swallow sound and distance alike. Yet as he crested a small rise, Luke caught sight of movement in the distance. There, perhaps a quarter-mile ahead, was Frank. The older man was crouched behind a large rock formation, fiddling with something Luke couldn't quite make out. The black equipment box lay open beside him, its contents glinting in the harsh sunlight. Luke's hand instinctively moved to his holstered weapon as he assessed the situation. He needed to approach carefully. Frank was clearly unstable, and there was no telling what he might do if cornered. Keeping low, Luke began to circle around, using the natural cover of the landscape to mask his approach. As he drew closer, the details of the scene became clearer, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Frank had set up the camera on its tripod, its lens pointed at a cleared area of ground. Beside it, laid out on the sandy soil, was a black tarp. But it was the contents of the equipment box that truly chilled Luke to the bone. An array of surgical instruments, their steel surfaces reflecting the sunlight in sharp, dangerous glints. The realization of what Frank had been planning hit Luke like a physical blow as he locked eyes with Rodriguez. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was something far more sinister. A chilling thought gripped him. Had Frank brought Olin out here to carry out some kind of twisted procedure? The possibility that he intended to terminate her pregnancy in the most brutal, unimaginable way made Luke's blood run cold. Bile rose in Luke's throat at the thought, but he forced it down. He needed to stay focused to end this before it could go any further. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out from behind his cover, his weapon drawn. "Frank Dawson!" Luke called out, his voice ringing across the desert. "This is Officer Carter. Step away from the equipment and put your hands where I can see them. You don't want to do anything funny, Frank." Frank's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and fear. For a moment he seemed frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights. Then, with surprising speed for a man his age, he bolted. "Stop! Police!" Luke shouted, breaking into a run. But the uneven terrain made pursuit difficult, and Frank had a head start. The chase led them further into the desert, weaving between towering rock formations and across patches of loose scree. Luke's lungs burned as he ran, the hot, dry air searing his throat with each breath. But he pushed on, driven by the knowledge of what would happen if Frank escaped. As they rounded a large boulder, Frank's foot caught on a protruding rock. He stumbled, arms windmilling as he fought to keep his balance, but gravity won out, and he fell hard, skidding across the gravelly ground. Luke was on him in an instant, his knee pressing into Frank's back, as he secured the older man's hands behind him with handcuffs. "Frank Dawson, I'm so sorry to say this to you, but you're under arrest," Luke panted, the familiar words tasting like ash in his mouth. How could the man he'd known for years, the man he'd thought was a loving father, be capable of such monstrous acts? As Luke hauled Frank to his feet, he could see blood trickling from scrapes on the older man's chin and cheek. But any sympathy he might have felt was overshadowed by the memory of Olin, bound and terrified in the back of that van. "Why, Frank?" Luke asked as he began marching the man back towards the vehicles. "Why would you do this to your own daughter?" Frank's laugh was hollow, devoid of any real mirth. "My daughter." She turned on me. Ungrateful little thing, doesn't even realize how good she had it. Luke's grip on Frank's arm tightened involuntarily. "What are you talking about?" But Frank just shook his head, a wistful, almost pitying smile creeping across his face. "You'll see, officer. You all will. I was just trying to set things right." As Luke approached the cluster of patrol cars with the handcuffed Frank in tow, the air was thick with tension. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly, casting harsh shadows across the rugged desert landscape. Officers milled about, their faces grim as they processed the scene. Luke handed Frank over to Officers Johnson and Rodriguez, who began reading him his rights. "You don't understand what this man was about to do," Luke told Officers Johnson, his voice thick with emotion. "Rodriguez and I found his camera and tripod out there in the desert. It looks like he was about to perform a C-section or God knows what, on his own daughter, out there while recording it." A heavy silence fell over the group, as the weight of Luke's words sank in. Officer Johnson's face went pale, and the nearby paramedic gagged audibly, turning away to steady himself. The horror of the situation pressed down on them like the oppressive desert heat. Luke turned back to Frank, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that true, Frank? You were going to kill your daughter's baby?" Frank's expression didn't waver. "Yes," he said simply, his voice devoid of remorse. "I couldn't just let that child be born. I was going to kill it myself if I had to." "You're going to kill Olin in the process," Luke roared, struggling against his team's hold. Frank met his gaze, his eyes hollow. "Even if that's what it takes, it's the price I have to pay for failing her. I didn't protect her well enough. I let her get pregnant so young and out of wedlock. This is my burden to bear." The officers stared at Frank, their disbelief morphing into a collective, chilling realization. From behind Luke came a heart-wrenching sob. He turned to see Olin, or rather Angela, stumbling towards them, tears streaming down her face. The paramedics tried to hold her back, but she pushed past them, her pregnant belly prominent under the blanket she clutched around herself. "How could you?" she cried, her voice raw with emotion. "I begged you to let me keep this baby. You promised me you'd accepted it." Frank's face softened for a moment, a flicker of the man Luke thought he'd known passing across his features. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I tried, Olin. God knows I tried," Frank said, his voice low and intense. "But as the weeks went by, as your due date got closer, I just couldn't accept it. That child is a bastard, unholy and unblessed. I saved you when you were young. You belong to me, not to some boy who got you pregnant." Luke's head was spinning, trying to make sense of the conflicting narratives. He turned to the young woman, confusion evident on his face. "What's going on here? Olin, what is he talking about?" The young woman took a deep, shuddering breath, squaring her shoulders as she faced Luke. "He's not my father," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "My real name is Angela Ramirez, not Olin Dawson." Luke's brow furrowed, his mind racing back to his first encounters with Frank and his supposed daughter years ago. "But why the different name all these time? Frank introduced you as Olin when we first met 5 years ago." Angela's eyes, filled with a mixture of pain and newfound strength, met Luke's. "Look up my real name in your system," she said softly. "You'll understand then." From inside the patrol car, Frank's voice rose again, filled with venom. "Ungrateful child," he shouted. "You should be grateful for what you have. Your real parents never wanted you." Luke signaled to the officers, who quickly secured Frank in the cruiser, muffling his continued tirade. Turning back to Angela, Luke saw her swaying slightly, the emotional toll of the confrontation evident in her pale face and trembling hands. "Let's get you seated," Luke said gently, guiding Angela back to the ambulance. Once she was settled, he keyed his radio, connecting to the police station's dispatch. "This is Officer Carter. I need a background check on the name Angela Ramirez, priority 1. As they waited for the information, the scene around them continued to unfold in slow motion. The investigation team arrived, their vehicles kicking up dust as they pulled to a stop. Luke watched as they were directed to the makeshift surgical site, their faces grim as they surveyed the disturbing scene. Paramedics swarmed around Angela once again, their voices low and soothing as they checked her vital signs and examined her pregnancy after the heated tension. Luke stood nearby, his presence a silent promise of protection and support. "Blood pressure is slightly elevated, but within normal range for her condition," one paramedic reported. Another paramedic, her hand gently palpating Angela's swollen belly, offered a reassuring smile. "The baby seems to be doing just fine. Strong heartbeat, good positioning. No signs of contractions or distress." Angela nodded, her hand protectively cradling her bump. "I feel okay," she said softly. "Just overwhelmed." The radio at Luke's hip crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. "Officer Carter, this is dispatch. We have that information you requested on Angela Ramirez." Luke stepped away from the ambulance, his heart racing as he prepared to uncover the truth behind this complex and disturbing case. As he lifted the radio to respond, he caught Angela's eye. She gave him a small nod, granting permission to unravel the mystery of her past. "Go ahead, dispatch," Luke said, his voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions roiling within him. "What have you got for me?" The radio dispatch returned to Luke, their voice crackling through the intercom with a mix of disbelief and concern. "Officer Carter, after conducting our research, we've discovered that Angela Ramirez was reported missing 15 years ago from an orphanage in Florida. The case went cold, but it was never closed." Luke's eyes widened, his gaze shifting to Angela, who sat quietly in the ambulance, her hands protectively cradling her swollen belly. She met his look with a mixture of fear and relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders, only to be replaced by the uncertainty of what would come next. Approaching Angela carefully, Luke spoke in a gentle tone. "Angela, can you tell me more about this? How did you end up here in Texas? Angela took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper as she began to speak. I wasn't just missing. Frank, he took me from the orphanage when I was small. I didn't know it then, but a few months ago, when he was throwing one of his emotional fits about my pregnancy, he told me the truth. He said he'd taken me all the way from Florida to Texas, and we've been living in this remote place ever since. Luke's brow furrowed, a mix of compassion and confusion on his face. Why didn't you call the police when you found out? Angela's eyes welled up with tears. I loved him. He raised me, gave me a home. I couldn't just turn him in. And when I found out I was pregnant, I thought maybe having a family would make things better. I couldn't imagine raising this child alone without him. Luke nodded, understanding the complex emotions at play. He gently pressed for more information. Can you tell me about your life here? Did Frank keep you isolated? Angela's gaze grew distant as she recalled her childhood. When I was small, Frank wouldn't let me play far from home. He always said Texas was dangerous, full of bad people. I never went to school. Frank taught me at home, but I was allowed to play with the nearby neighbor kids for a few hours each day. She paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. It wasn't until I was 12 that he let me help in the store. That's when I started to see more of the world, but even then, it was always under his watchful eye. Luke listened intently, his heart heavy with the realization of how controlled Angela's life had been. When did you start to suspect something wasn't right? Angela shook her head, a bitter smile crossing her face. I always knew I was adopted, you see. Frank told me he'd saved me, that my real parents had died. I believed him. It wasn't until he told me the truth in his anger, that he had taken me, that I began to question everything. But everything was just complicated. She looked down, avoiding Luke's gaze as if she was ashamed. Luke gave a reassuring nod. It's all right, Olin, Angela. There's no need to feel ashamed, he said softly, his tone gentle as he voiced the question that had been weighing on his mind. Angela, were you aware of what Frank intended to do today? Angela's eyes widened in horror. No, I never thought... he'd been acting strange lately, more controlling than usual, but I never imagined he'd try to... She couldn't finish the sentence, breaking down into quiet sobs. Luke placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, giving her a moment to collect herself. When she had calmed somewhat, he spoke again, his voice filled with determination. Angela, I want you to know that you're safe now. We're going to make sure you and your baby are taken care of. He outlined the immediate future for her, a safe house, counseling, support services. As he spoke, he could see a glimmer of hope beginning to shine in Angela's eyes. It won't be easy, Luke said honestly, but there are programs to help you, to provide training so you can work after the baby is born. You won't be alone in this, I promise. For the first time since this ordeal began, a genuine smile crossed Angela's face. Thank you, Officer Carter, for everything. As the sun began to set over the desert, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape, Luke couldn't help but feel that this was more than just the end of a case. It was the beginning of a new chapter. For Angela, for her unborn child, and for the small community of Terlingua that would never be quite the same again. The Texas stars were just beginning to twinkle in the vast sky as Luke helped Angela into a waiting patrol car that would take her to a safe location. As he closed the door, he made a silent promise to himself and to Angela. He would see this through, would help her build the life she deserved, free from the lies and manipulation that had defined her past. As the car pulled away, Luke turned to face the desert once more. The Lone Star gas station case had changed him, had reminded him of why he'd become a police officer in the first place, to help those who couldn't help themselves, to bring light to the darkest corners of human experience. With a deep breath, Luke headed back to his own patrol car. There was still much work to be done, a long road ahead for Angela and for justice. But for now, as the cool night air settled over Terlingua, there was a sense of hope, a feeling that even in the face of unimaginable hardship, the human spirit could triumph. And as Luke drove away from the scene, the desert stretching out endlessly before him, he knew that this case and Angela's story would stay with him for years to come, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the power of compassion to change lives.